Hi there, I'm Vincent Boss and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing when you ignore your ex, this happens. I provide audio coaching to help people try and get their ex back or get a new girlfriend or boyfriend. Check out my website for more details. www.dateme.tips. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. So now let's get back into today's podcast. And today we are discussing when you ignore your ex, this happens. So if you have gone through a breakup, it can be very difficult to know whether or not you should respond to your ex. In today's podcast, I'll be discussing 3 likely outcomes if you ignore your ex. So let's get straight into this, and point number 1 is if you're a dumper. So if you're listening to this and you're a dumpee, then please keep listening because I will be speaking about your perspective very shortly. But right now in point number 1, we're going to be speaking about if you're the dumper. And if you are a dumper, you have obviously ended the relationship. You and your former partner were together, you lost romantic emotional attraction, you decided to action the breakup. But what happens if your dumpee reaches out to you after you ended the relationship, after the breakup took place, after the dust has settled? Your ex, the dumpee, is messaging you. Your ex, the dumpee, is reaching out to you. What happens if after you receive this contact, this reaching out, this text message, what happens if you decide to ignore your dumpee? Well, in my opinion, there are 2 main factors as a dumper that you need to consider about what exactly may happen if you decide to ignore your dumpee once they contact you. And I say once they contact you because most dumpees will. You know, I would say the vast amount of dumpees who become in that position, obviously after they have been dumped, will reach out to their ex, the dumper. I would say a dumpee who doesn't reach out to their ex, the dumper, is in the minority at this stage. So if and when your dumpee reaches out to you, if you ignore them, the first thing which is going to happen is you are going to create anxiety in your dumpee's mind. Now you might be thinking, I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to end a relationship and break their heart and then further hurt them by ignoring their contacts, and maybe I should just respond back to them. Well, I would say if you do that, you also run the risk of confusing the situation and potentially giving false hope. So you are walking a tightrope. This is a balancing act. And for you as a dumper, you need to think long and hard about if and when you should be responding to your dumpee. You know, I'd be thinking about this as soon as you ended the relationship, because as I've just mentioned, it's very likely that your ex is going to contact you. So as soon as you end the relationship, you should be thinking, what do I do if they reach out to me? Well, first of all, I would say you need to differentiate between necessary and unnecessary contacts. If a contact they send you is necessary, then you should absolutely respond. I like to use the example of maybe they have left their work laptop at your house. If they have done that and they reach out to you and say, hey, when can I pick up my laptop? I need it for work. Then of course you need to respond. And I wouldn't say you should leave them hanging either. You know, respond as soon as you naturally are able to. As soon as you get the message and you are free and available, send that message back. Don't play games. Don't think, well, I'm going to make them wait a week before I respond. No, you know, they need their work laptop. Be respectful, send them a message back. But what if it's unnecessary? What if you receive non-necessary contact from your ex, the dumpee, after you have basically said, I no longer want to be in a relationship with you? Well, you need to be thinking exactly about what message you're trying to convey back to them. And that doesn't just mean about the words that you type. It also means the message you are giving them subconsciously, subtly, via your response and the way you are responding. What I mean by this, if your ex, the dumpee, reaches out and says, hi, how are you? And you respond back and say, hey, it's so great to hear from you. I've been thinking about you all day today. I'm doing well, thanks. How are you? What have you been up to today? If you respond in a way such like that, you are definitely conveying to the dumpee that you are interested, you are missing them, you potentially want to get back together. Now, if you as a dumper have no thoughts about reconnecting, you have no desire to move beyond this brief message exchange, I don't suggest you respond with as much vigour and as much enthusiasm as I just gave in that example. In fact, I would be very wary of responding at all. Now, like I said, you want to be making sure that you balance this right, because you are going to be giving them anxiety if you don't respond. But if you respond in a too enthusiastic way, you're going to be getting into their mindset, but you want to get back together. So the balancing act is a difficult one, and ultimately only you can make that decision about if and how and when you respond. But I would say, by and large, if you have ended a relationship, if you receive unnecessary contact from your ex, then if you do respond, it should be short, sharp and sweet, okay? It shouldn't be anything more than, I'm doing good, thanks, I hope you're well. Okay, the suggestion I gave there is by ending things on a statement rather than a question. What that shows is that you do not want to grow the conversation. Now, if a dumpee receives such a response from you, they're not going to be overly happy because they want to reconnect with you. It's not going to make their day if they receive such a reply. But what I can say is that is much better than you giving them false hope by making them think you want to get back together when you don't. So if you select to respond, make sure you're polite, you're kind, but you're not growing that conversation. Your dumpee needs to understand your position right now, which is unfortunately you don't want to reconnect at this time. Now, if you ever do change your mind, if you ever do start to miss your ex, if you ever do want to see how things could progress, then you need to reach out to them. You need to be putting your front foot forward, so to speak, by sending that first initial message. So if your dumpee reaches out to you and you don't know what to do, you need to think of the consequences. If you respond in an overly enthusiastic way, you could give them false hope. If you don't respond at all, you're going to give them anxiety, but at least it's also shown your position true and clear. And if you want to go somewhere down the middle, which is where I often think dumpers would like to land most of the time, make sure you're polite, you're respectful, but you're not growing that conversation because you're ending on a statement without a question. If this happens a number of times, often the dumpee will start to understand that you don't want to grow this conversation further. And if it does unfortunately become obsessive and you feel that you can't respond any further, then maybe let your ex know. Just say, look, I don't think it's good for either our mental health right now if we engage in an active platonic friendship by texting back and forth. I don't really feel that's right for now. Who knows? Maybe we could exchange messages in the future and then just see how life progresses for both of you going forward. Whatever you decide to do, make sure you are comfortable and confident in your decision, because at the end of the day, this is your life and this is their life. It's not mine, it's not your friends, it's not your family. This is up to you because the consequences are going to be for you and your ex. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast about when you ignore your ex, this happens. And point number 2 is if you're the dumpee. So if you're the dumpee and you go through a breakup, obviously you have been dumped, you're heartbroken, and then you receive a text from your ex, the dumper, you're thinking to yourself, should I respond to this? What should I do here? Well, you need to consider your position. Are you in a position where you want to try to reconnect with your ex? Are you in a position where you want to be civil and have a nice conversation with your ex? Or are you really focusing on moving forward and you don't want to bring up things which could be overly dramatic? Now, if it's that third option, if it's the last thing I've just mentioned, and you are worried that responding could make things dramatic, potentially upsetting, maybe you want to move forward and you feel that you can't if you engage with your ex, then I would suggest that you perhaps shouldn't respond. You don't owe your ex the dumper anything. And if they reach out to you and you don't feel comfortable, if you feel that your mental health may suffer by responding, then you've got to do what you've got to do. And that is perhaps not replying at all. Now, what happens if you don't respond to your ex the dumper? Well, I've spoke to many dumpers and a number of them have said to me, but if they reached out to their ex the dumpee and they got no response, they'd probably take that as, you know what, I should back off. And you know what? I've broke their heart, I've reached out, they haven't responded, I'm not going to do that again. Now, of course, this can't be guaranteed for every single person because we're all unique. But I think the research that I've done is important for you to consider. Because if you are a dumpee and you receive contact from your ex and you do want to reconnect, well, I would say not responding could be a mistake. Because as I've just said, a number of dumpers have told me they will try once and only once. So, what does that mean? Well, if you're a dumpee, you might be thinking, well, if my expert dumper reaches out to me and just says, hi, how are you? That is not enough engagement. That is just a breadcrumb. That is not something that is worthwhile to me. So I'm going to wait until they send something which is. I would suggest that is a risky game. Now, does it mean your expert dumper definitely will never contact you again? Of course, we can't say that. We don't know for definite what the future holds. I can only tell you the likelihood. And what I can say is that most dumpers who have spoke to me have said that if they were ignored by their dumpee, they wouldn't try it again. Therefore, I think it's a risky strategy if you receive a text from your dumper to not respond. It might not be the most exciting message, but you can still grow this conversation. I believe you can grow the largest tree from the smallest acorn. And if you want support through the communication stage or anything regarding relationships, breakups, dating, or life coaching, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service where I become your coach and your teammate. We will take this journey together if you want my support. And if you do, please go to my website, www.dateme.tips, for more details on my audio coaching service where I become your coach and your teammate. So if you're a dumpee, you receive a text from your ex and you think to yourself, you know what, I'm not going to respond. I would say it's quite possible that this is the last time they will reach out to you. So even if you don't want to reconnect, even if you think, well, I don't want to reconnect, but it would be nice just to have a conversation and see how they're going, I would say you should respond. It doesn't mean you're committing to getting back together. It doesn't mean you're committing to marriage. This is just responding and seeing what they have to say, and maybe a conversation can be grown. So in summary, as a dumpee, if you receive a text from your dumper and you think, I'm not going to respond, I would say you may not get that opportunity again. And perhaps the only reason you shouldn't respond is if you think it's going to be detrimental to your mental health and detrimental to you moving forward with your life. If you think you can respond to this, and even if it doesn't get to a scenario where you get back together, you'll be absolutely fine. If you think you can respond to this and still date other people up until you may want to reconnect with your ex, if you think you can respond to this and still live your life to the full, then I should say maybe you should respond. Because, as I keep saying, you may only get this one chance. If it's going to hurt your mental health, if it's going to stop you moving forward, then that is when, as a dumpee, you shouldn't respond to your ex. So now let's get into point number 3 and the final point of today's podcast about when you ignore your ex, this happens. And point number 3 is blocking an option. So sometimes people say to me, if I'm going to ignore my ex, should I just block them? And I would say it depends on what you are trying to convey, okay? Because if you ignore, should you block? I understand the question, but if you are trying to convey a situation where you may want to speak again in the future, you definitely shouldn't block them. Blocking is something which feels permanent. Now, I know it's not necessarily permanent. I know you could change your mind. But if you're thinking, well, I just don't want to speak right now, but maybe I'll speak later, I don't think that blocking is an option that you should be going for. It feels final. As I said, we know it's not necessarily final, but it feels final. So if you want to speak in the future, if you might want to speak later, but you're just a bit busy right now, don't block your ex. Blocking your ex should ultimately be saved for those situations where you really need to protect your mental health. As I was saying in point number 2, about sometimes as a dumpee, you might not want to respond to your expert dumper because of your mental health. It's that kind of thing I'm speaking about. Maybe if you keep getting messages from your ex, from whatever position you're in, whether you are a dumper or a dumpee, if you keep getting messages, if you feel they are not respecting your wishes, if you feel they are not taking the hint, then that is when blocking is an option. But don't forget, it feels final. It feels like this is definitely your position. So I would think very carefully if you want to use this scenario, if you want to use this blocking action. So if your mental health is struggling, if you feel that your ex is going to be abusive, if you feel in any type of worry or danger, then obviously, of course, blocking is something that you need to do. Maybe even contacting the authorities if it really is going above and beyond what you feel able to cope with. But blocking isn't something which should be taken lightly. It can have a big effect on the future. Somebody who knows they have been blocked is very unlikely to take this kindly. They're very unlikely to see you in a positive light. They're very unlikely to be happy about what has happened. You know, it's going to affect how they think about you. It's going to affect how they think about themselves. It's going to affect their future position regarding you. Maybe they blame you, maybe they blame themselves, but what I can say is they are going to be blaming somebody. So if you want to try to smooth things over with your ex, then blocking them just because you're busy for the day and you don't want to receive their calls is probably not the best move. I would suggest just ignoring them until you have the ability and the option to actually respond to a call, respond to a text. That is better than blocking, because blocking sends out that message that I never, ever, ever want to speak with you again. And we all know we think and speak and live and experience in the moment. So what feels right to you today might not be what feels right to you tomorrow, next month, or next year. So if you think and acknowledge that your feelings and your thoughts might change, then blocking is probably not something you should do. But if your mental health or some type of safety doesn't feel right with the way that they are contacting you, then blocking is definitely an option that you could explore. If you believe that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description.